Are you a podcaster? Are you wanting to do a podcast in 2018? We are talking live video plus podcasting, and I am just opening up the questions. It's a Q&A show today, and I just want to hear from you. I want to answer your questions. I want to help you out and figure out how you can take your podcast live or go the opposite way, turn live content into podcasting. What questions do you have? What struggles are you encountering with your podcast? Or if you're thinking about doing a podcast, maybe you're thinking, I don't know how to format it or things like that. So bring on any and all questions. And if you want to learn more about this topic as we move forward, I have some upcoming live shows about it. I have some upcoming training about that. And I'm today, I just want to make sure I understand where you are at with your brain space. So if you want to learn more, all you have to do is type "learn more" in the comments. And you know what, Philip?
What's that?
I totally forgot to set up that URL. That URL won't work. Wow, I do need coffee. Christopher is absolutely right. So Philip's going to remove that URL right now as we speak. And if you're on Facebook, type "learn more" in the comments, and I will send you additional information soon as we do more of these topic conversations. Okay. So let's see. I see lots of questions coming in. We've got Lawton and Jeff and Matthew and Aditya who says, "Call me AJ." Okay, thank you. AJ, it is. And lots of questions coming in. So bring it on. If you have a question, type question. Or if you just want to make a comment, that's cool too. But I am going to do a couple of things. I'm just gathering your questions right now. So let's talk about this whole thing, right? Because what I've noticed over the last year is there are a lot of podcasters who are set in their ways. You do a podcast, you've got a routine, totally get that, right? Like that's fair. We need routines in our business to make it efficient, to make it a process that we can do. But then you're like, as a podcaster, you're thinking this whole live video thing is very important. So how do I get use out of both mediums? And the thing that's so different when it comes to podcasting and live video versus video and live video, there's a slight, connection with video and then live video. But when it comes to podcasting and live video, two extremely different mediums that require different thought processes. And if you're a podcaster and you're used to that format, then you're used to either just going, recording, not having any feedback. You're just sitting there talking to a mic. Maybe you have a co-host or an interview show, so you do have that kind of feedback, but you don't really have the feedback of the general public until it goes out. And then, even then, unless you have a lot of comments on your blog, you don't really have the interaction going on with your podcast. A lot of people are listening to your podcast while they're driving. They are not really taking the time to talk to you about the podcast and give you feedback. And so there are multiple different ways to structure live video and have it complement, enhance, and add to what you're doing with your podcast. And so we can talk about some of those, but I really want to hear what your questions are. And if you're not doing podcasting already and you're wanting to, or if you're doing a podcast and you've tried a few things with live, then bring those questions as well. Okay. So lots of questions coming in. I'm getting to those in just a second. I just want to kind of go over a couple of things. One person who's a podcaster who's tried a couple of different methods and has done really well at that is Pat Flynn. So smartpassiveincome.com. And he's done a fantastic job at, finding different ways to kind of work the two together. And one thing that he does is a Q&A show. Now, he has a couple of podcasts. He has Smart Passive Income, and then he has Ask Pat. Ask Pat is a Q&A show, but pre-submitted questions. Now, what he does with live video is he actually goes live and he does a Q&A live show. Now, those questions are, I believe, separate from the Ask Pat. Now, maybe he takes some, and if he's not, then this would be a great solution for you. You could actually go live with a Q&A, and you could, do some of that stuff where you're taking some of those questions that come through and putting them into your podcast format. The key here with podcasting and live video is not to change up what you're already doing. Like, I would never in a million years ask you to completely change what you're doing with your podcast because it's working. Now, if it's not working, then let's change it. But if it's working, there's no reason that live video should affect what you're doing with it. Should only enhance. So hopefully I just wanted to really start with that because that's so freaking important. I will never ask you to change the format, but when you do your podcast live, you need to have the mental process in place that you are doing your podcast live. Maybe it's a behind the scenes recording that people are watching live, and you want to make sure that you have the integrity of the podcast in place, and you don't mess with that, that it's a separate thing. But you can do that and still have a show flow and still have a structure to your live show that allows for the engagement. So, okay, yes, AJ says, yes, that makes sense. Fantastic. Okay, let's see. Amiko says, I'm hoping to learn from people who are using live streaming and converting to podcast. I'm not sure if I can do 2 different productions. This is a fantastic and very common worry, right? Like, you don't want to add a whole lot more work to what you're doing, right? And so the thing you have to realize, one of the biggest mistakes that people make when it comes to podcasting and live video is that they try and do their live show first, and then they have the interaction, they have the engagement in live video format, and then they take that and they move that over to a podcast. That's not going to play well on a podcast format. Maybe once in a blue moon, the audience would love that for your personality. But generally speaking, that is not a good idea, because podcasters or podcast listeners, they want this more intimate experience where they feel like you're talking to them. And when you introduce, let's say they're in their car, right? When you introduce a whole lot of people into their car because you're talking to AJ and I'm talking to Amiko, and if I were to do this format in a podcast format, it just does not play well. But you can structure your show in what I call a show flow so that you have chunks that maybe you edit later together, or you take the bigger chunk and you have for the podcast where that's the training portion or whatever, and then you have the engagement with the live audience before and after, right? So there are ways that you can structure that show flow so that you have more impact for both concepts, the live show and the podcast. Is that making sense? Okay, okay, fantastic. Amiko says that makes sense, and Nazim says exactly. There are not enough hours in the day. Believe me, somebody in my live video for launches program just asked me yesterday, Bill, he was like, or this morning, he's like, I'm watching some of your videos, like, how do you get that much done of all of the things that I'm working on? And it's, my answer was, I kill myself. And I literally am just gonna have to make a change there soon, because otherwise that's not a good thing, right? And so I'm always looking at ways that you can save time and be more efficient. But at the same time, we do need to talk about the fact that this is a decision that you have to make for your audience. So if you do your podcast live, if you leave a huge chunk of time where you're not engaging with the audience, then there are some considerations to be made there. It is not necessarily the best experience for a live video. However, if you set it up right and if you present it to your audience correctly, as in, hey, I'm bringing you along for the ride. You're getting to see this before anybody else gets to hear it, before it gets released, things like that. If you bring them along in the right way to more of a behind the scenes approach to your podcast, then that can work really well. Except that if you want to really use live video to the biggest possible benefit, then you probably want to do something a little bit more targeted for your live audience. And this is a conversation that I was having with Ray Edwards this week, and he's looking into options, and so I'm kind of helping him kind of like think about all of the different ways that he could structure his show. And he's right now leaning more towards doing something new and fresh for his audience, but working the two together, where you promote each and it helps grow each. So on the podcast, you're pushing people to the live show. On the live show, you're pushing people to the podcast. And this way, you have a much bigger audience. You're providing value in the specific ways that the platform lends itself to, and you can grow both at the same time. That's a really powerful way of using podcasting and live video at the same time. Okay, Stacy had said, I'm a podcaster, real life resilience, and I've done a whopping 2 lives. Woohoo! At least you've done 2 lives. I need and want to do much more and regularly. All right, well, stick around here, Stacy. We will help you do that. But yes, it's definitely about consistency and practice of getting those live videos out the door. Okay. Frederick, so I'm not the tech person around here, but he says he has a Zoom H4n, but it's making ugly crackling sounds. Typically, that's due to a bad cable. I mean, that's the first thing I would check, is the cable, or if there's a kind of a buzzing happening, make sure that your microphone cable is not touching your power cables. Things like that can make a good difference. Okay, so Teresa said turning live content into a podcast. And so I told you we'd come back to that. I actually just kind of went over that. And if you're just joining us, if you have any questions about live video and podcasting, working those two together, how you go about approaching both versus separately, together, separate, all of that. Do you have questions about, whether you should or shouldn't? Just bring it on. That's what we're doing today. It's all open Q&A. And if you want to learn more about upcoming trainings I have about this topic and upcoming content and live shows that we have about this specific topic, where we'll go into, a little bit more depth about this stuff, then to just type learn more. That's all you need to do. Type learn more in the comments. If you're on Facebook, YouTube, I need you to hop on over to Facebook and do that. Sorry, I forgot to set up the URL that was supposed to lead you to the right spot. That was my mistake. And Christopher was absolutely right. I need more coffee. Okay. So AJ says, whenever I think of turning my audio only show into video, but whenever I do, I hear the song "Video Killed the Radio Star." That is not the case anymore. The thing is, when you think about video, and when you as a podcaster, if you've been doing podcasting for a while and you feel really comfortable with the audio only format, honestly, you've got to realize that in this day and age, sorry, my dog is, that's Abby. She's hanging out with me. She's poking her head up. You've got to realize that the world that we live in today, people want to hear from you, right? And it's funny, back when I used to listen to a lot of radio, I would find it completely fascinating. Like I would have a radio host that I enjoyed listening to, and then I would be like, I wonder what he looks like. I wonder what she looks like. Like that constant thought. Like you have a picture in your head of people who are in audio format, and then when you find out what they look like, it's usually a weird experience. Am I right? At least it is for me. And that when you think about video and when you think about live video, that connection that it really allows you to have with your audience on a much deeper level, that is absolutely key, and something that you need to be taking advantage of. You don't have the same capability when it comes to podcasting. You have a deep connection. It's just a different type of connection with your audience as a podcaster. When you add live video to that, they become even more loyal. They become even more connected to you because they can see you. They can take what they've already liked about you and add to that. So it's a really important thing to add to your mix. Okay. Nazim says, I'm not a podcaster yet and wondering if it's worth it. Maybe video podcasting? I think I just answered that as well. That's why, oh no. Okay. So you're saying maybe podcasting is podcasting worth it? There are a couple ways to think about it. So one, I would say podcasting is a massive, massive market. There's millions of people, if not billions, millions of people, I'm sure. I don't know what the latest numbers are from iTunes, it's not iTunes anymore. It's Apple Podcasts. That's the new name. But anyway, I don't know what the exact numbers are from them these days, but there's a huge market of people who listen to podcasts. And if you can find a unique and special to you, format and your personality and allow people to connect with you in that format while they're driving or at the gym or on the train, then you're that's a big market available to you. Now, I'm not telling you have to. If you're not doing a podcast yet and you're wondering if that's even worth it, then one option, like you said, is to do maybe a live show that you make available in video podcast form for your audience. You could totally do that. It doesn't have quite as much play as audio podcasting. But then another thing to think about is your overall business goals. What are you trying to accomplish? How much time do you have in order to manage another thing? And so there's no right answer to that question, Nazim, but I would encourage you to really look at whether you feel that could impact your business and what you're trying to accomplish in 2018. If you feel it is, then absolutely go for it. But if you feel like you're really not sure that podcasting is something that you should be doing, and it doesn't match what you need to spend time on in your business, then don't do it. There's nothing saying that you have to be all the places all the time. I really want you to hear that. Okay. And he also said podcasters are super obsessed with tech setups. Is it really that necessary to go all out, mixer mics, etc.? The beauty about live video and podcasting is that a lot of the live video technology, if you're already implementing live video technology, then the possibilities are already there for podcasting. And so it's a bit of a different setup for podcasting and live video than it would be if you're just doing podcasting, but it's slight tweaks. And so is it necessary to have the right tech? Yes, because you need to have good audio. If you are doing a podcast, audio is the number one most important thing. So it is in video. Audio is always your number one most important thing. So you do need to have the right tech setup. It doesn't have to be overly complicated either, though. Okay, let's see. Frank says, I would think that it would help you to be the type of person that likes to talk and interact with people and tech in order to do a podcast, I think is what Frank is saying. Obviously, definitely the talking part. If you're going to do live video aspect of it, you definitely need to care about people. If you hate people and you never want to talk to them, live video is not for you. So walk right away if that's you. Let's see. Christopher says, well, if you think about it, after you do your live show, it basically becomes a podcast. And that's what I was saying earlier. You need to structure it if you with the end in mind. If you are going to do that, if you're going to do your live show where you're going to turn it into a podcast later in audio only format, you need to think about the structure, and it needs to be different than the typical show flow that I train on for regular live video shows. And so that's what I actually have created multiple different show flows for different purposes, but you have to think about the end goal in mind before you start doing that path, because it is a very different medium for podcasting and live video, and so you want to make sure that you're taking that into consideration. AJ says, Nazim, podcasting is a long-term game, but it's worth it. Let's see. Abby, you got some fans there. How do you feel about that, huh? You got some fans. Hi, girl. She's feeling really needy lately, by the way. That's why she's in my lap today, because she is feeling very, very needy. Okay. Yes, Joe correctly points out that Amico, at this year's VidCon and Vid Summit, maybe you meant Vid Summit, maybe he talked about it at both VidCon and Vid Summit, I don't know. But I know he said this at Vid Summit as well. Gary Vee said he believes in that audio only podcasting will still be bigger than video. I don't know, I don't know that bigger versus the same of importance, but I don't know, I don't think he stated any particular research on that, but I agree with him that podcasting is massive and it only is going to keep getting bigger, just like live video is getting bigger and video in general. Yes, Niger, we do use vMix for the show. If you didn't catch yesterday's show, you should totally go watch that after you're done here, of course. But I actually walked you through how I'm bringing the comments up on screen, and I talked about vMix as well. Okay, so Natasha says, do you suggest to not go live while recording a podcast interview? It's not that I don't suggest not to go live. That was double negative if there ever was one. But what I suggest is that if you're going to do a podcast interview, and if interview is your format, then I'm going to put Abby down here. She seems to need to get down. So if you're doing an interview format for your podcast, then what I would suggest is so Cliff Ravenscraft actually does his podcast live. I suggested to him the other day that he adds, a thing on the screen that when you're doing the interview, now there are different ways that you can structure this, right? So if you have the interview, you can do that live for sure. You would want to have the engagement with the audience up front, then get into the podcast interview, and then do more engagement at the end. When you're thinking about an interview specifically, then typically, even in live video, I highly suggest that you really focus in on that interview. You want to bring the audience engagement and questions into the mix, but if your end goal is a podcast, then what I would suggest is that you actually have like a section prepared for audience engagement, and so that it's not interspersed throughout, making the podcast feel jumbled. Does that make sense? So you would want to have this section set aside where you take that audience engagement and those questions for your guest, and that works really well on live video in general as well. Good idea. Fantastic. Okay. And, hey, Ray! Ray's in the house. Different modalities equals bigger audience overall. Yes, indeed. You have the podcast, you have the live video, and you want to use both of those together to increase your overall reach of followers and engagement across the board. Jason says Vid Summit was awesome. Indeed. By the way, speaking of Vid Summit, Daryl Eves and us, we are actually working on some really cool plans for Vid Summit 2018, and more details on that are coming soon. If you didn't go to Vid Summit and you're thinking about it, you definitely want to think about that even harder. We'll also have some really interesting things going on for the live stream of Vid Summit in 2018. So that's about all I'll say right now, but it's going to be interesting. It's going to be really, really cool. I'm excited about it. Okay, so Jeff says, I really love the idea of structuring the show to strip the podcast apart, maximizing the show content. Might do this for my new show I'm launching in 2018. Fantastic, Jeff. And that's key, is you always got to think about that end goal in mind. If, like Ray, maybe doing, more specific live content, then you need to think about that, and that's going to be structured differently than if your end goal is to take what you do live and turn that into a podcast. So the thing is that the thing to realize is that any decision that you make on this structure of how you do your podcast and your live show together, then you want to involve the audience in that decision process, right? I would highly encourage you to ask them and help them see why you're doing what you're doing, and invite them into that conversation. That's what I talk about all the time with the live video buzz campaign, and in getting them invested in what you're doing. There's a whole lot to talk about for that, for sure. And again, if you want to dive deeper into some of these conversations that we're having today, again, this is an open Q&A, so we're having to tackle a lot of different things. But if you want to dive deeper into some of this stuff, type "learn more" in the comments here on Facebook. If you're on YouTube, please come over to Facebook and type that. And then I'll send you additional information as we do more shows, and as I have some training available for this topic specifically. Okay, let's see. AJ said, I'm looking for the shortest straight line from audio podcasting to live streaming with minimal equipment and setup. Okay, so that's again one of those bigger topics that we would need to dive deeper into. But yes, if you're going to do both, then you need to set up for both. And honestly, live video from a tech perspective the live video setup would take precedence over hopefully I'm saying that right and that makes sense, but it would take precedence over your podcasting setup, just because you can actually add more to it with the live video setup. For example, you can throw things up on screen, and you can have that that visual call to action and tell people what to expect throughout your podcasting recording, things like that. And lots of you typing "learn more." Fantastic. Okay. Amiko, type "learn more" if you have not already. We will get to the more tech stuff. As you know, I do strategy, David does tech, and right now, by the way, I got to show you this. Right now, David is in Austin at Ryan Levesque's studio that we're turning into a studio. He actually is, we're working with him on his live video build. And so just a sneak peek, David posted these couple of photos. This is one of the rooms that they're considering. And then this is his draw up. This is what the first step David does when he's working with people, for the level 4 studio builds. He draws it up. And that's a key component. He has to literally fly out. And this week, as you know, he was going to Rhode Island, and then he was in Denver, and now he's in Austin with Ryan. And if you're not familiar with who Ryan Levesque is, he's from the Ask Method and the book Ask. Wonderful place to start. It really super aligns with what I teach here in live video as well, because I'm always talking about getting information from your audience, and live video is a fantastic way to do that, as we're doing here today, right? So I love live video because I get to have this conversation with you. Okay. Let's see. Any other questions? Oh, Joe says David was out in Rhode Island with Joe, and see, he says he didn't take any pictures of my office. Oh, I'm sorry. He should have. Okay. Christopher says, I would tackle the live video setup first, because once you have that down, then you go backwards and do a podcast. Exactly what I was saying. Yeah, if you're going to do both, you want to set up for both, and live video has the trump card there because of all of the extra stuff that you can do. But you also have a really high quality podcast setup for that as well. All right, so I think I answered most of the questions. If I missed any, just let me know. I will come back in and answer those. Okay, one more. Hold on, don't go anywhere. Lawton, how do you handle the interaction on a podcast? This is exactly what I was talking about when I'm talking about the structure and the show flow of your live show. And so depending on the way you already structure your podcast, if you have a mailbag segment or a Q&A segment, you can actually use that information, or that you can use the live show to gather the information for those segments is one way to handle that. But what you want to avoid is having a whole bunch of interaction throughout your podcast, because it just doesn't play as well in a podcast format as it does in live video. And so you want to structure the interaction so that it's beneficial for your end goal. And you need to look at the way your podcast is already structured so that you can fit it in appropriately. And so as we dive deeper, as we move forward with these conversations in the coming weeks, then I can dive deeper into some of that stuff when it comes to interactions. Be sure to type learn more if you want to be involved in those conversations in the comments right now, and we'll get you set up for that. And Amiko says, this is so helpful. Thank you. Thank you for being here. We are here every Tuesday through Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific. Tomorrow is live video news, and that's at 10 a.m. Pacific. We will be out and about using our level 4 mobile setup, using the Live View and our other gear. And so tomorrow, depending on the weather, we have one idea that we want to tackle, but we'll have to see how it goes, because it's supposed to have 33 degree or mile per hour winds, and that audio will suck. So we're trying to figure that one out. Now we'll see where we wind up tomorrow, but definitely join us. You can type show in the comments below in order to get notified of when we go live for that tomorrow. And I promise not to screw up my live notifications like I did today. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you then. Bye.